It was the last time the four men would be in the West. They knew it, and they didn't care. Extraordinary events had been set into motion, and now it was time for them to get their final instructions and play their part. The Wall Street Journal Europe had a front page profile of the new Treasury Secretary Stuart Iverson. High ranking but unnamed administration officials said the president now had someone he, the nation, and the world could trust to lead the global economy to new heights. Iverson seemed to fit the bill, and even Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee were singing his praises. The four could only smile at their good fortune. They certainly couldn't talk about it, not here at least, not sitting in separate pews at St. Stephen's Cathedral, Stephansdom in Vienna. One never knew who was lurking in the shadows or hiding in plain sight. Built originally as a Romanesque basilica in the 12th century and then rebuilt in the 14th century as a cathedral in the classic Gothic style, St. Stephen's was an icon in the heart of Vienna, covered with the black, filthy soot of some 600 years of war and fires and industrial development. Vienna, of course, was not only the capital and largest city of Austria, but itself an icon in the heart of Europe, a city long known as the gateway to the Eastern powers and Moscow. Here, Germans and Russians and the Allies once battled for control. Here, the external walls of the cathedral were pockmarked with bullet holes of Nazi soldiers whose jackboots once clipped-clopped along the cobblestones, instilling fear in the hearts of all who could see or hear them. Today, the icon within an icon was a great draw for tourists, and no one on this gentle, snowy morning could suspect such monsters in their midst. Never glancing at one another, the four casually watched the visitors come in one by one, minute by minute. Mostly old women. Very few men. Almost no children, except for an occasional screaming infant who invariably echoed throughout the cadaverous sanctuary and high up into the great tower and steeple. Eventually, a woman in a black dress and matching black hat with a white ribbon pinned to her lapel came in, knelt down, and began to pray. Slowly, one by one, each of the four men gathered his belongings and casually made his way out of the cathedral. It was time. None acted as though they knew each other, and each headed in a separate direction, but 20 minutes later, convinced they were not being followed, they converged on the Graben Ditch Street in English at the place known as the Plague Monument, built in remembrance of the end of the bubonic plague, which raged through Europe in the 6th, 14th, and 17th centuries and killed more than 137 million people. It was now the point of rendezvous for four men once dubbed by analysts at the CIA and their British counterparts at M16 as the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. One of the men unlocked and entered a white rented Volvo parked nearby. Another took pictures like a tourist, while his partner flipped through a Father's Guide to Austria and talked about finding an inexpensive restaurant for lunch. The fourth discreetly slipped his gloved hand into a nearby trash can and fished out the unmarked envelope within a discarded German newspaper. He peeked inside: 4 train tickets, 4 new passports, 4 visas, and 40,000 euros in small bills. The team now jumped into the waiting running Volvo and headed for Siedemendorf, Vienna's south train station. On their way, all but the driver passed the journal story around, as well as a copy of the International Herald Tribune, the newspaper published jointly in Europe by the New York Times and the Washington Post. The story that attracted their greatest interest this morning was a front-page profile of Russian President Vladimir, his remarkable new strategic partnership with the U.S. and NATO, as well as his intensifying political troubles with hard-line nationalists within the Duma, the Russian parliament. New polls inside Russia put Vladim's approval rating south of Stalin's, and with a cold, bitter winter settling in over Moscow, people's frustration over the rapidly deteriorating economic conditions inside the country and growing fears of a new wave of hyperinflation were running deeper every day. Being a friend of the West was doing the shrewd and savvy Russian leader little good at home, and various Western analysts quoted in the story worried that Vadim's days in office might be numbered. Even the country's oil industry, which accounted for nearly half of its entire gross domestic product, was falling on hard times. The price of oil hovered between $22 and $25 a barrel. If it dropped too low, Russia would be in very serious trouble indeed. The Herald Tribune writer wrote that growing concerns in Washington over the future of the Russian economy suggest an old Russia hand like Iverson could be the right man for the moment. At precisely 9:30, the four parked, entered the train station, and headed for the Ost section of the East section, where they arrived on the platform and waited. The terminal was dark and dingy, yet somehow classic and impressive, with a high arched roof of steel glass suggestive of a World War II airplane hangar. Trains from all over Europe arrived and departed here, and tens of thousands of passengers crisscrossed these platforms every day. But not these passengers. Not one of them had ever been to Vienna before, and the longer they waited, the more nervous they got. Their eastbound train to Bratislava was supposed to leave at 10:05 a.m. sharp, but in fact it was late, and all four would end up waiting for another 2 full hours. Each cursed the gray skies and freezing temperatures and lit up his American-made cigarettes, unaware that from three separate angles, two men and one woman, each in a separate rental car, were furiously snapping dozens of 35mm photographs with powerful zoom lenses while radioing a team of other agents loitering inside the terminal that the four horsemen were in the corral. The two calls came almost simultaneously. One from the Pentagon, one from Langley. Both were top priority, and within minutes, the U.S. Counterterrorism Task Force was reassembled via secure video conference link. Mr. Vice President, this is Jack at CIA. Go ahead, Jack. Sir, we just got word from one of our teams in Vienna. They've positively identified the Iraqi cell as the four horsemen. They're at the train station, and the Iraqis have tickets that take them to Moscow, sir. My team wants permission to take them down and interrogate them for what they know about the attack on the president. The VP considered that for a moment, then shifted gears. No, not yet. Have your team trail them. Intercept any calls they make. Monitor any contacts they make. Have them check in on the hour. I want to know where these guys are going and why. And I want to know before anyone knows we're watching them. Sir, are you sure? We've been hunting these guys for 6 years. Now we've got them. And they just happen to be moving the same day somebody's attacked the president? Exactly, sir. That's why we need to take them down now. No. That's why we need to shadow them until we find out what they're up to, or until I say to take them down. Got it? Yes, sir. Good. Who's next? Mr. Vice President, this is Bert at the Pentagon, began the Secretary of Defense, his eyes weary and red. Yes, Bert, what have you got? Sir, we just got this report. 3 of our reconnaissance jets have just been shot down over southern Iraq. We've got F-15s going in right now to take out the SAM sites, but it doesn't look good. Are you kidding me? No, sir, and there's more. I'm listening. Our satellites are picking up indications that the Iraqi Republican Guard may be in the process of being mobilized. There's activity around 3 mechanized units southeast of Baghdad, and we just got word from our forward command post near the border inside Kuwait. Radar is picking up several small blips, could be the recon units. We're trying to verify that right now, sir. You're right, that's not good. No, sir, it isn't. We'll know more over the next few hours, sir. But given all the rest of what's going on, I'm concerned Iraq may be preparing to make a major military move of some sort. Traynor didn't complete the thought, but he didn't have to. Suddenly, CIA Director Jack Mitchell broke in. Mr. Vice President. Yes, Jack. DDI just called from downstairs. He's on the phone with Brigadier General Yanni Barak, head of Amman Israeli military intelligence. Sir, sure, I know Yanni. What's he got? Sir, he's got a team. I think you've met with these guys, the Sayeret Matkal. Yes, sir. One of their team recon. Right, sir. What are they telling him? The unit is picking up intercepts of heavy military radio traffic in and around Baghdad. Hold on. Okay. He says that agents on the ground are reporting air raid sirens are going off throughout the city. Apparently, there are no civilians on the streets. State radio and TV are off the air. The Republican Guard appears to be mobilizing, and there are already some advanced recon units heading east toward Kuwait and south toward Saudi Arabia. It's all pretty chaotic, sir, but that's the latest. Any Iraq units heading toward Israel? Not that have picked up. What's their sense of it right now? Prime Minister Duran doesn't want to wait. He's convening an emergency security cabinet session any moment. The thinking is he'll put the IDF on high alert and call up their reserves within the hour. Full or partial? He couldn't say, not yet. What's your gut tell you, Bert? Full. Jack? Y'all know what I think. The Israelis are going full, and we should get started too. Calling up our reserves and moving our forces back into the region immediately. Marcia? Still go full. Given what's been going on all night, this does have all the makings of a move by Saddam. It may be a prelude to Iraq seizing control of the oil fields in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. I agree with Jack. We need to move fast on our own reserves, and we need to talk to the Saudis about putting boots on the ground there immediately. That's all going to take time, a lot more time than choice. If it is a move by Saddam, who's most likely to go after first, Kuwait or Saudis? Pressed the VP. Both, either. I don't know yet, admitted Kirkpatrick. Either way, it's extremely serious. Mr. Vice President, everyone turned toward Secretary of State Tucker Payne. Yes, Tuck? Sir, I just got off the phone with the Saudi prince to express our condolences. They're safe, but pretty shook up. Do they have any clue as to who did this? Not yet. Everything's happening too fast, but they promised to call me the minute they had something. What about Moscow? Heard anything from them yet? No, sir, not yet. I'll keep checking. So we don't know what we are looking at yet. Not exactly, the Secretary of State replied. I just think we need to be very careful not to jump the gun here. Jump the gun? Asked Mitchell. Mr. Secretary, the President and the leaders of several of our major allies have just been the subject of an incredibly well-planned, well-financed, and almost flawlessly executed conspiracy to kill them. It's early, I agree, but as we've just said, there is strong circumstantial evidence that this may be all the work of Saddam Hussein in a new play to dominate the Gulf and disrupt the formation of a Western coalition that could stop him. How exactly is calling up the reserves and deploying our forces to the region jumping the gun? Sir, I am just saying that we need to stay focused on our diplomatic options, not go off half-cocked, said Payne. Half-cocked? Asked Mitchell. How about locked and loaded? We're at war, Mr. Secretary. We all know there ain't no diplomatic options with the butcher of Baghdad. We all know we should have dealt with Iraq earlier, not just arming and training the anti-Saddam forces, not just playing games at the UN, but really taking out this monster once and for all. We didn't, fair enough, but now it's coming back to haunt us. Mr. Vice President, with all due respect, we are not at war, not yet. Not unless you and the President listen to the yahoos, warned Payne, the pasty-white, silver-haired former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. We need to consult with our allies and come up with a game plan. Yahoos, laughed Mitchell. Glad to know State has it all figured out. Why don't y'all just invite Saddam over for a barbecue and just hammer out this little disagreement once and for all, like nice, civilized UN choir boys? In fact, why not just pass another worthless resolution? Payne sniffed with disgust. The VP moved to regain control of the discussion. Gentlemen, please, settle down. Marcia, what's your sense of things? What would you recommend the President to do? Sir, I'm afraid we've crossed the Rubicon. We don't have any choice. I recommend a full ground stop immediately on all planes in the U.S. and no aircraft entering the country. Combat air patrols over both coasts and the borders. Shut down the borders with Canada and Mexico, at least until we get a handle on things. The last thing we need is suicide bombers coming over in 18-wheelers or freight trains. What else? Then, sir, I believe we need to execute Operation Imminent Cyclone as quickly as possible. That will move the Nimitz battle group back into the Gulf and park the Roosevelt and Reagan battle groups off the coast of Israel. We'll move out the 82nd Airborne and Delta Forces and get them on the way to Saudi Arabia this morning. The key is to get as many troops and mechanized units and air units in place as we can ASAP. She was right. And longtime chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a solid Washington hand if there ever was one, was beginning to get edgy. I agree with all of your recommendations, and so will the president, the VP began. But you guys know as well as I do, this isn't going to be enough if they start. But look, if Saddam Hussein has decided to go back after Kuwait, or after the Saudis, or after all the Gulf states, imminent cyclone isn't going to stop him. All of you know it. He scanned the room and the video screens on the wall in front of him. No one seems to disagree. We don't have the forces in place to shut him down quickly, not if he launches a full-fledged invasion. We can mobilize NATO to come with us. We'll definitely get the British. Who knows about the French and the Germans? But even if we do get NATO with us, we certainly don't have 6 or 8 months to build up. Saddam could have half the world's oil supply under his control by the end of the week. The team was silent. Each principal is contemplating the past few hours. I am going to go ahead and recommend to the president that we go to a full ground stop, that we immediately call up 50,000 reservists, and that we execute imminent cyclone. But Tuck, first get back on the phone with the Saudis and get them to ask us. Sir, right now, Mr. Secretary. Sir, obviously I will comply, but I must say for the record that we need to get the president on the line here soon and convene an official meeting of the National Security Council before we proceed much further. We will, assured the vice president. You just make sure the Saudis are with us 100%. They've been edgy in the past about us being there. And I don't need to tell you all there have been a lot of strains in our relationship over the past few years. They don't like the U.S. troops, especially women and Christians, anywhere near the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. But they need us and we need them. We need to make sure we're on the same page, fighting the same war. And they need to know we're not going to abandon them to the likes of Saddam Hussein. We're not going to undermine their regime like Carter did to the Shah of Iran. And we're not going to waffle and hedge and run feckless photo ops for foreign policy like Clinton did. We are dead serious about shutting Saddam Hussein down, and we're in this for as long as it takes. It's your job to make that crystal clear, Tuck. You got it? Yes, sir. Okay, now, that said, ladies and gentlemen, the vice president again scanned the faces of everyone in the room with him and every face on the video screens on the wall before him. I'm going to say it again. This isn't good enough. The president and I can't tell the world we were winning the war on terrorism and then lose the Gulf for crying out loud. We need new options and we need them fast. The vice president sat and stared for a moment at the communications console in front of him. No one knew whether he was done. No one knew quite what to do. So much for the victory lap. Delays were not uncommon. They happened all the time, in and out of 2 major Vienna railway stations, but this was no typical day. By the time this particular train finally pulled in, 20 U.S. agents, 15 men and 5 women, each Arabic and Russian speaking, had arrived, been briefed, had taken up positions in each of the train cars most likely to be occupied by the 4 horsemen. These Iraqis were professionals, though they didn't know yet they were being followed. They certainly had no intention of mingling out in the open to be observed and overheard if they were being shadowed. No sooner were they on board with their tickets punched by a conductor than they slipped into their reserved 4-person sleeper compartment and locked the door. The best the lead CIA agent could do was put a few of his team in the 2 sleeping berths on either side and have them attach highly sensitive listening equipment to the wall, connected to digital recording equipment. The rest of his team would assume the roles of waiters, tourists, and baggage handlers, while he took up his own command in control position with the engineers at the front of the train. The only good news on this leg of the assignment, the four weren't going anywhere the agents couldn't go as well. At least not for the next 2.5 days. They all might as well settle in for a long winter's night. The American and Israeli agents regrouped. They walked quietly down an empty corridor. When they reached the end, the man with the gold-rimmed glasses punched a 9-digit passcode into a plastic box on the wall, unlocked a massive steel door, and entered. Everyone moved briskly down 3 flights of stairs. There they showed their IDs to 2 armed sentries, put their thumbs on a fingerprint identification pad, were cleared, and stepped into a huge soundproof, blast-proof, wood-paneled office packed with TV monitors and computer screens, military aides and bodyguards. The office of Israeli Airport Security Chief Yitzhak Galit. Galit didn't look up as the 4 men entered and quickly shut the door behind them. He was huddled around a TV screen behind his desk with 3 other men. One was Yassi Ben Ramon, the head of Shin Bet Israel's internal security service, nervously chain-smoking Winston's. The second was Avi Sadak, head of the Mossad, Israel's renowned foreign intelligence service, calmly puffing on a thick Cuban cigar. The third was a quiet man named Diedrich Black, head of the FBI counterterrorism team based in Israel, who now poured a Diet Coke into a glass mug filled with ice. "Well," said the American who just walked into the room. All eyes looked to Black, but Black, wearing jeans, casual brown shoes, a black t-shirt, and a .45 caliber sidearm and a shoulder holster, just stared into his glass and waited for the fizz to subside. Secondhand smoke filled the room with a bluish haze, but no one seemed to mind. "You know why I don't drink Diet Coke?" Black asked the room of high-powered spooks as he continued to watch the fizz in his glass go down. No one had any idea what he was talking about. "I always hated Diet Coke. Stuff tastes like dishwater," Black continued. "But I had lunch once in Washington with the director of the bureau. At the time, it was the fall of 1991, and we were having lunch at the Four Seasons with Henry Kissinger." Zadok glanced at Ben Ramon. Was this guy losing it? Kissinger ordered a Diet Coke, and then the director ordered a Diet Coke, and I figured, well, I guess martinis are out, so I ordered a Diet Coke, because, Kissinger's a pretty smart guy. If he drinks Diet Coke, then I probably should too. And I've been drinking them ever since. Black looked up, picked up his glass, and raised it in the air. Cheers. The Israelis in the room burst out laughing, partly out of nervous tension, and partly because they had never known quite what to make of Black. As an operative, he impressed them, but as a human being, he amused them no end. Zadok was the first to catch his breath and light up a new cigar. "You're a moron, Black," he told him with a thick Israeli accent. "Yeah, but I'm thin." "Fine, you're a thin moron." Even Black had to laugh at that. 6'3", trim, completely bald. His wife once told him she couldn't decide if he looked more like Lex Luthor or Mr. Clean. And about to turn 50, Diedrich Peter Black was a 25-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, recruited fresh out of Harvard Business School at a time when none of his classmates would ever have even considered a career in law enforcement over one on Wall Street. He loved his job and had never thought twice about having taken it. After hopscotching the world for most of the 1980s, he'd spent most of the 1990s based in Washington, working on high-profile terrorism cases like the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, the Oklahoma City bombing in 1994, the Atlanta Olympics bombing in 1996, and of course the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. He was cool, methodical, and virtually devoid of the kind of passion and emotion that can cloud the judgment of a successful investigator. That wasn't to say he wasn't moved with compassion by the deaths of fellow citizens and colleagues. He certainly was, but he seemed to have an instinctual ability to channel that passion into a laser-like focus. He focused on the details and anomalies and idiosyncrasies and discrepancies that turn up in every case and that often turn into determinative leads that can turn into fibers that become threads that emanate from finely woven fabric and can end up unraveling even the most complicated of cases. So, Deke, we're all really intrigued about how you pick soft drinks, said the man with the yo-yo. But what's the deal here? What's the verdict? Black took another sip of the cold, bubbly soda, then turned to the others. Avi, how about you? Avi Zadok leaned back in his chair and took another puff of his cigar, savoring the taste in the moment. Finally, he broke the suspense. To tell you the truth, I believed him, declaring the aging Mossad leader. Black picked up the half-eaten falafel sandwich sitting on a paper plate beside his Diet Coke and took a huge bite. Yossi? He asked, his mouth full of pita and hummus. Honestly, Deke, Ben Ramon replied, his accent just as thick as Zadok's, but betraying his Sephardic Moroccan roots. I'm afraid I have to agree with Avi. Black looked him straight in the eye, and Ben Ramon finished his thought. He didn't know anything. No, it was more than that, interjected Galit, the airport security chief, suddenly capturing everyone's attention. He was actually good, very good. He was honest. And loyal, added Ben Ramon. Anyone else? Black asked, eyebrows raised, scanning the room. Thick again with nervous tension. No one said a word, especially not the man with the yo-yo. Black paced the room, thinking, chewing, assessing the turn of events. He stepped over to the TV on Galit's desk, picked up the remote, and rewound the tape, then played it again without the sound, just watching the face in the center of the screen. He slowly finished his sandwich and his Diet Coke, then wiped his mouth with a tiny thin paper napkin and turned back to the rest of the group. I agree, Black finally admitted. He didn't know. Everyone looked down, quiet and smoking. Then Galit broke the silence. You Americans should have recruited him, he said nervously, looking around the room for agreement. Then Black smiled. We just did. The Black phone marked FBI rang just before 10:30 a.m. Eastern. The National Security Advisor picked it up on the first digital ring. Kirkpatrick, Prairie Ranch, stand by for Black Ops. Orange Grove? Yes, ma'am. Secure? Yes, ma'am. Put him through. Thank you, ma'am. Hold one. Kirkpatrick grabbed a nearby yellow legal pad and a black Sharpie. She pulled the cap off and prepared to take down the message. What's the word? It's done. And? She asked. There was a pause. Then she nodded. Thanks. Now clean up and get back here now. Bring everything. You'll get instructions in the air. Kirkpatrick hung up the phone and looked over at the vice president. Everyone else in the room was consumed with other activities. The VP waited for the answer. Kirkpatrick wrote one word on the last page of the yellow legal pad and slid it over to him. He looked down discreetly, peeked at the last page, and nodded. Clean, it read. The vice president picked up the blue phone in the console before him, the one marked NORAD. Get me the president. Black placed a secure phone call from Galit's office. 7th floor, may I help you? I need to talk to Esther. It's urgent. One moment, please. As Black waited, he asked one of the Israeli officers to pack up everything he'd need for the trip back, including Bennett's body. Ambassador's office, Esther speaking. Esther, it's Deke. Hey, Deke, you okay? I need the DCM. He's on a call. Now, Esther. All right, hold on. Black opened a new Diet Coke. On one TV, he watched the Sky News replays of the attack on the presidential motorcade and the attacks in London and Paris and Saudi Arabia. On another TV, he watched CNN replay excerpts from a press conference with the White House Press Secretary Chuck Murray at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. I need Bennett's cell phone and BlackBerry, he told Galit, and I need your guys to crack the passcodes fast. Galit nodded. One of his men scrambled off to make it happen. Just then, Tom Ramsey, the deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, came on the line. Deke? Hey, Tom, it's me. You need the ambassador's plane? How'd you know? Checkmate just called. What about Payne? You need his clearance? Asked Black. Are you kidding? I'm just asking. Deke, don't you know the facts of life yet, son? I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, and I'm saying that asking Secretary Payne to sign off on a covert ops mission using a State Department plane would be like asking Pat Robertson to sign off on a nudist convention on the 700 Club. It ain't gonna happen. Black chuckled. Get it? Got it. Good. How soon you leaving? Soon as it's ready. They're warming it up now. Oh, and I just sent Jane over with a little surprise. Tom, I don't need any more surprises. Don't worry. It's from the ambassador himself. Just take care of yourself. Thanks, but what did I do to deserve anything from you guys? Nothing. Right. Be good. I'll try. An hour later, Yitzhak Galit's secretary office was nearly empty. Zadak and Ben Ramon shut down the airport until further notice and rushed back to meet the prime minister and the security cabinet. Most of Galit's men were clearing the buildings above and setting up a heavily armed perimeter around Israel's only international airport. As he waited for his flight back to the U.S. to be ready, Black began scanning Bennett's emails and a combination of urgent pleas from his staff all over the world to fill them in on what he knew about the president's condition. News bulletins from AP and one little email from Aaron McCoy in London. Black took a deep breath. She'd sent him all the details on his charter flight, including tail number, 2 phone numbers for the signature operations desk, the cell numbers of his flight crew, and even direct numbers for the tower, followed by a little reminder, don't panic. Black made a mental note to have that flight canceled, then scrolled through the AP's updates. Sources, President alive, location unknown. VP takes command at White House. Queen safe despite London attacks. Canadian Prime Minister wounded in Paris bombings. 747 destroys Saudi palace. King family barely escape. 3 Secret Service agents dead. Breaking, White House says President secure at NORAD. Nation awakes to terrifying TV images. Feds cut interest rates by 0.5%. World reacts in horror to attack on U.S. president. Market plunges 11 in Japan, 13 in Hong Kong. FAA orders no-fly zone over entire U.S. 4th Secret Service agent dies of head trauma. Vice President consoles Secret Service widows. Russian President Vadim offers U.S. help in tracking down terrorists. FBI briefing describes Gulfstream's final minutes. Murray, evil has reared its ugly face again. President, doing better, will address nation at 9 p.m. Dow plunges 9. NASDAQ down 12 at opening bell. Breaking CIA sources say Iraq may be preparing for war. White House memorial service to be planned for Saturday. With the help of a technical expert on Glit's team, Black finally broke through Bennett's cell phone password protection and began listening to his voicemail messages. Most were calls from the GSX team scattered across the globe. 2 were from McCoy repeating all the flight details she'd emailed to him. 1 was from his executive assistant about his luggage. 2 were from his parents checking on him. Black now called Bennett's home answering machine. Again, Glit's technical people broke through and Black listened to the messages. The eeriest was from Secretary Iverson. Black winced and replayed it twice. Hey, John, it's Stu. Quick update. Things have settled down a bit. The president's doing okay. Wants to meet with you about the deal ASAP. You can reach me at 303-555-9697. Again, 303-555-9697. And use a landline, not a cell phone. I'll figure out a way to get you to us. If you get in any trouble, let me know. See ya, kid. Black took a deep breath. It was going to be a long flight. It was now 10 p.m. Israel time. Black finally received the clearance he needed to get back to the U.S. The November night air was brisk and breezy, but after so many hours cooped up in Galit's smoke-filled bunker, it felt refreshing. Black walked across the tarmac, stood for a moment, and stretched his legs. He felt exhausted and lightheaded. He suddenly wanted to retire, move to Vail or Aspen, buy a little ski lodge, and sit under a peaceful, quiet canopy of moon and sky and stars, far away from cell phones and pagers and crises. He was getting too old for this. Good evening, Mr. Black, said a fit, rugged black man in a crisp blue Air Force uniform. I'll be your pilot tonight, Colonel Frank Oakland. Good to meet you. The 2 shook hands. 3 heavily armed American agents with plastic wires running into their ears stood nearby, as 6 more Israeli security agents with Uzis at the ready surrounded the plane at Galit's directive. The plane was fully loaded and fully fueled, just waiting for its final passengers to board. Good to meet you, Colonel. Let's get the show on the road. You got it, sir. We'll be wheels up in 8 minutes, and you just let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Anything at all, all right? Thanks. Let's do it. Black walked a few feet over to the steps of the plane, then stopped abruptly. It's a G4, isn't it? The pilot hesitated. Yes, sir, she is, he said quietly. Black stood for a moment, sizing up the aircraft, then began to walk around the nose of the plane. She's big. 88 feet, 4 inches long, Oakland agreed as he followed Black around the plane. Got a wingspan of almost 78 feet, and she's nearly 2.5 stories high. How heavy? Maximum? Yeah, about 75,000 pounds. She can carry a boatload of fuel and go more than 4,200 nautical miles in one flight. Black said nothing, then stopped beside one of the two engines. Rolls Royce, offered the pilot, unprompted. The best money can buy. 14,000 pounds of takeoff thrust. She can almost hit Mach 1. Black shook his head in disbelief. How high can she go? 45,000 feet. Take. Black slipped under the tail, careful not to get behind the engines, walked slowly back over the steps, and turned to the pilot. He stared at the man for a moment without saying a word. Then, almost in a whisper, if you were flying from Toronto to Denver, he paused for a second, then took a deep breath. Would you be in danger of running out of gas? The pilot looked him straight in the eye. No, sir, not a chance. Black stared into his eyes for a moment, then looked away, checked his watch, turned and headed up the steps. His security detail and the pilot followed right behind him, and the ground crew scrambled quickly to secure the aircraft for takeoff. On board, Black leaned into the cockpit, quickly scanned the instruction panels, and shook hands with the co pilot, completing his final pre flight checklist. As he turned back to the cabin, he was greeted by a flight attendant who couldn't have been more than 25, with short black hair and warm brown eyes. Maria Perez had a sweet, gentle smile, but best of all, she was holding some fresh, hot coffee in a dark maroon mug with a gold seal that read American Embassy, Tel Aviv on the side, and a small white china plate of warm, gooey chocolate chip cookies baked fresh and brought over by the security team. Black gratefully took the mug and the plate of cookies and carefully set them both on a small, low table to his right. A larger table to his left held a huge dark blue porcelain vase of fresh cut pink roses and a giant platter of luscious fresh fruit, Jaffa oranges, watermelon, strawberries, kiwi, red grapes, red delicious apples, and plump juicy pears to die for. On another side a table farther back there were crystal dishes of mixed nuts and silver dishes of Christmas M&Ms, green and red, plain and peanut, along with small bottles of spring water, Perrier, fruit juices, and sodas of every kind. This was the surprise Ramsay had been talking about. A little nice spread from the ambassador and his wife, and Black appreciated it. His job didn't come with many perks, and he savored each one. Black had never been on the U.S. ambassador's plane, but he was impressed, and he quickly settled into one of 8 white leather swivel chairs. Next, he fastened his belt quickly as the plane began to taxi almost immediately. The G4's interior was absolutely gorgeous and far roomier than the aging, stripped down Learjet the FBI usually used to send him around in the US. Thick, rich carpet, a long white leather couch, a beautiful polished mahogany conference table with a collection of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time, Newsweek, and Forbes, a built in combination TV and DVD player, and a stereo system with a 6-disc CD player from which Mozart's Turkish March softly filled the cabin. Black leaned back into his chair and stared out the window, watching 4 Israeli army jeeps with soldiers in full battle gear escort the G4 to the runway. An involuntary chill shuddered through his body. He closed 2 air conditioning vents nearby, retrieved his coffee mug and a cookie, checked to see that the coffee wasn't too hot, and then took a sip. Perez, the daughter of the Air Force Chief of Staff, he later learned, quickly unbuckled herself from her seat in the back of the plane and brought him a thick wool blanket and a large soft pillow. Black accepted both gratefully, setting aside his coffee and cookie. Then he slid off his shoes and put his feet up on the low table in front of him as the flight attendant dimmed the lights and settled back in her seat. It had been a long day, and it wasn't over yet, but by the time the G4 lifted off, Dietrich Black was out. The plane was halfway across the Atlantic. Oakland came over the intercom and told Black he had a secure call from Washington. Black quickly rubbed his eyes, took a swig of cold coffee, grabbed the airphone beside him, and punched line 1. Black, do it. Now, now. Roger that. And the line went dead. Black gathered his thoughts for a moment, got up, walked over to the table of drinks, opened a tiny bottle of spring water, poured some on his hands, and splashed on his face. Next, he chugged down the rest of the bottle and wiped his face with a nearby hand towel. Okay, he announced to his team somberly, it's time. One of the 3 members of a security detail unbuckled himself and got up. He was not just a skilled marksman. He was also a physician on loan from the CIA. He got out his medical bag and knelt by the couch. It was there that the lifeless body of Jonathan Myers Bennett lay covered with a navy blue wool blanket. The CIA doctor quickly rolled up Bennett's left sleeve, swabbed the skin below his elbow with a cotton dabbed in rubbing alcohol, and pulled out a white plastic syringe. Next, he pulled off the cap, squirted out some fluid, and tapped the syringe to remove any remaining air bubbles. Then he stabbed Bennett's arm and waited. Seconds later, Bennett's eyes flickered to life, and everyone began to breathe again. Black sat in a swivel chair across from Bennett. Once the doctor was done with his work, he and everyone else moved to the front of the plane, out of Bennett's immediate line of sight. It took a few moments, but the young man came to and slowly sat up. Black just swiveled slowly, back and forth, back and forth. Bennett looked out the windows on both sides of the plane and saw two F-16s flying escort. "Where am I?" he asked, groggy and disoriented. 39,000 feet over the Atlantic," said Black. "I'm not dead?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of disbelief. "No, Mr. Bennett, you're not dead. In fact, welcome back." A few moments passed. Bennett tried mentally to grab hold of something, anything that would root him in some reality he could understand. "Where was I?" "On a mission, Mr. Bennett." "What? Doing what?" "Proving your loyalty to the president." Bennett tried to swallow. His mouth was completely dry. Black handed him an open bottle of water. Bennett took a small sip but still had trouble swallowing. "Who are you?" "My name is Dietrich Black. I'm a counterterrorism specialist with the FBI." "Oh," said Bennett blankly. "You the guy that tried to kill me?" "No. Where's he?" "Nobody tried to kill you, Mr. Bennett." Bennett wasn't amused, but he said nothing. "We call this Operation Irish X-ray. It's a way we can shake a person down to test him in a moment of crisis to see if he's what we call Irish Spring, clean as a whistle. Let's just say it's faster and more effective than a 3 to 6 month FBI background check." "You are saying you've done this to other people, friends of the president?" "I can't really say more than I have. But the idea is that I'm supposed to think I'm about to be killed, so I'll spill my guts, if not my bladder, if I've got anything to hide." "Pretty much." "Well, it worked." "It did, and you passed with flying colors. So you believe me?" "I do." Bennett tried to take another sip of water, but began coughing. Black handed him the small hand towel, and Bennett wiped his mouth. He was still very drowsy and not fully there. "Did you before? Did I believe you before our little test?" "Yeah, whatever." "Honestly, Mr. Bennett, I wasn't sure. Was anyone? Let's just say you have some good friends in high places." Bennett stared at Black for a moment, then turned and noticed the rest of Black's team anxiously staring at him. "Who are they?" "The good guys." "Oh." Bennett nodded and tried to take another few sips of water. The flight attendant slowly, cautiously, gently came over and offered him a small, cold dish of applesauce and some saltine crackers. Bennett looked up at her. He felt completely drained but peaceful and calm. He guessed it was the narcotics or whatever they'd shot him up with. Apparently it hadn't been lethal. He smiled at Perez and she smiled back. "Saeed," Bennett said, turning back to Black, "is he really, a terrorist?" "No." Bennett nodded and tried to take a spoonful of applesauce. "That's nice. And Galishnikov?" "No," Black said. "He really is your friend." Bennett coughed, then took another small spoonful of applesauce. Was all this really necessary? The FBI agent hesitated. "That's not my call," Black said, honestly glad that was true. "I just want to know who to sue," Bennett said, his face betraying neither anger nor amusement. "Were they really about to give me a lethal injection?" "No, it was a mild sedative, a liquefied version of a sleeping pill. The whole thing was designed to act like an accelerated truth detector to find out what you know and how loyal to the president you really are." Bennett set the bowl of applesauce and the little plate of crackers down on the table beside him and pulled the blanket up over most of his body. He was cold and lonely and spent. "So now you know," he said quietly. "Now what?" Black reclined in his leather seat, folded his hands behind his head, and smiled. "You're going to see the president." Bennett nodded, closed his eyes, and slowly drifted back to sleep. Dietrich Black knew the young man might not remember this conversation. Indeed, they might have to have it several times before they finally got to Colorado, or at least before they were actually cleared to go in and see the president. But at least his target was alive, breathing, clean, and in the hands of the U.S. government, not Islamic terrorists. Operation Irish X-ray, the arguably unethical, if not illegal, capture and interrogation of Jonathan Myers Bennett by direct order of the President of the United States had been an enormous risk, and it could still backfire, but it also just might have been worth it. Black chewed on that, then pulled a blanket over himself and closed his own eyes. The Secret Service didn't call the President Gambit for nothing. Now he knew why.